Welcome to Ski Stories. In today's episode, Stenmark versus Hirscher. Now, this video is about who is the greatest male ski racer of all time. Warning, it is the last episode in a trilogy. If you haven't watched the first two episodes in this Stenmark Trilogy, now would be a good time to hit pause and do that. I'll base some of the numbers, facts and conclusions on the stuff I went through in those videos, so this video will make much more sense if you've watched them. But now, let's go. How do we even compare skiers? The easiest and most obvious way is to look at raw numbers or counting stats, and that's where the ski database and its super ranking comes in. That is where we start. The super ranking, where Hirscher sits on top with a comfortable lead, is a great resource. I urge you to go check it out. That's where I started. But is it really that simple? Well, no. First, although the super ranking is great, I don't think it's perfect. It favors skiers who had most of their careers after 1985. And personally, I think it gives too much weight to championship medals, considering that it gives zero weight to some achievements like finishing second in the overall cup. Later in this video, I'll propose some adjustments which I think would make the ranking more balanced. Second, is counting stats really everything? What about a World Cup career that, although it might score slightly fewer points in the super ranking, still had better percentages and averages? Let's say World Cup points scored per start. Should that carry any weight? Or what about versatility? A skier who can win slaloms and downhills. What about overall impact on the sport? Should that matter? Personally, I think if skiers have similar counting stats, the other stuff should factor into our overall assessment. Also, if we're comparing skiers from different eras, we're probably going to need to have a look at whether that actually could have had an impact on counting stats as well as on the other factors in the equation. Actually, let's start with that era thing. Stenmark and Hirscher skied in different eras. So what were the big differences? One thing is that the disciplines are not the same. The Super G became an official event in 1983 as Stenmark was coming out of his absolute peak when he was 27 and 9 seasons into his World Cup career. The combined event has also changed. In Stenmark's days, the combined events were always a slalom and a downhill. In Hirscher's time, the speed leg of combined events was sometimes a Super G rather than a downhill. On the World Cup, Hirscher actually only ever competed in the combined when the speed leg was a Super G and not a downhill. In 13 of Stenmark's 16 World Cup seasons, parallel slalom races were held. But although the race was an individual race, the results only counted toward the Nations Cup and not toward individual results, except in 1975. And that is different now. There are more races on the World Cup calendar now than in the 1970s and 80s. And not even the championship events are the same. There are now team events in which Hirscher has 2 goals. That event did not exist when Stenmark raced. Back in Stenmark's day, the World Championships were only held separately every 4 years, but the Olympics doubled as the World Championships. So for Stenmark's double Olympic gold in Lake Placid, he was also simultaneously awarded 2 World Championship golds. So 2 golds for the price of 1. That's very different now. In fact, this one's so important, I'll discuss it in detail in the super ranking section later in the video. Here, I'll just say that in the super ranking, this is actually worse for Stenmark and better for Hirscher. Finally, the World Cup points and scoring systems have changed. There has been a top 10 system, a top 15 system, part of one season with a top 25 system, and the current top 30 system. In the following comparison, I'll use the top 30 system. The math is easier that way, and we're probably all familiar with it. Moreover, the scoring system has changed. Before 1988, not all results could be counted toward the overall or the event cups. Now, those are the main differences I have identified. Now we're ready to start comparing. The most natural starting point for any comparison would be the raw career numbers, and those are the ones you're looking at right now. It's interesting to see that Hirscher has the sole lead in only 3 categories: overall World Cups, 1 Olympic silver, and 3 more silvers from World Championships. Please note already here that just like in the super ranking, I have not included team event medals. I've only included individual medals. Second note, 2 of Stenmark's World Championship golds are double counted in the graphic because FIS consider the Olympics to simultaneously be the World Championships. Again, I'll deal with this later in the video in the super ranking section. The World Cup makes up the bulk of a ski racer's career, so we're going to go through a lot here. Just remember to breathe. Let's begin with the counting stats. Stenmark had 16 World Cup seasons to Hirscher's 13, so this could be a bit unfair to Hirscher. On the other hand, later, when we look at percentages and averages, that could be a bit unfair to Stenmark, who had a longer career. Now, Hirscher actually only skied in 1 race in his debut season, and he didn't score any points. So, for these purposes, let's disregard that season. So from now on, Hirscher had 12 seasons. Otherwise, his averages and percentages would be artificially lower. If we look at raw numbers, it's clear that Stenmark won substantially more races and had substantially more podiums, and he won 3 more discipline cups. Hirscher, on the other hand, had 8 overall cups. But, as I explained in the Rules and Asterisks episode, if the Stenmark rules had not been in force, Stenmark would have taken 6 overall cups. So to make the comparison fair, Stenmark needs to have his 6 overall cups. Also, what do we do with the parallel slaloms? Do we add them for Stenmark so he ends up with 89 total wins and 164 podiums? Personally, I think that's fair. If you don't agree, then we should take them out for Hirscher as well, which means Hirscher would end up at 65 wins and 134 podiums. That would also be fair, I guess. I just prefer to add the races that were actually held, rather than ignoring them. Now, let's move on to total World Cup points earned over their careers. Here, Stenmark has a huge advantage because of his longer career, 16,545 points, if we include the parallel slaloms. Hirscher earned 13,967. Unsurprising edge for Stenmark with 4 more seasons. As regards counting stats, Hirscher has 1 advantage on Stenmark, 8 overall cups to Stenmark's 3, or more fairly 6. That's it. Stenmark beats Hirscher in all other categories. Maybe that was to be expected with Stenmark's longer career. So, why don't we move on to percentages and averages, which should favor Hirscher with a shorter career that ended before any decline kicked in. If we return to World Cup points, Stenmark scored 1,034 points per season on average, and Hirscher scored 1,164, which means an edge for Hirscher. But here you should note that on average, Hirscher started 20.3 races per season, whereas Stenmark started 17.1. So because of that, a more relevant comparison would be World Cup points scored per start for their careers. For his World Cup career, Hirscher averaged 57.01 points per start. Stenmark actually has an edge here with his 57.64 points per race. That's tight, but Stenmark has the edge, not least because of his longer career. Now, let's turn to win percentages and podium percentages. We start with races won out of total races on the World Cup calendar, which would be an interesting way to measure dominance. To make sense of this stat, we first need to note that in Stenmark's career there was, on average, 31.7 races per season on the World Cup calendar. Stenmark would start 17.1 races per season. In Hirscher's career, the average was 37.3 races per season, and Hirscher would start 20.3 of them. All I want to note with that is that 3.2 more races per season is pretty darn significant with these 2 racers. 3 more starts per season would likely have meant 1 or 2 more wins per season for Stenmark during his decade of dominance. Hirscher had 1 season where he won 30% or more of all World Cup races on the calendar. That was in 2018 when he won 13 races of the total 36 races on the calendar, which meant a win percentage of 36. But Stenmark had 4 seasons in a row where he won more than 30% of all races on the World Cup calendar, with the highest being a win percentage of 41 in 1980. Another edge to Stenmark. Also, I think it's crazy to think that Stenmark did not win the overall cup in 3 of those seasons. Now, you can't control the number of races on the calendar, only the races that you actually start. So why don't we look at the percentages for that? If we look at career averages, Hirscher won 15% of all races during his time on the World Cup, and he won 27% of the races he started. Stenmark won 17% of all races held during his career, and he won 31% of the races he started, so another edge for Stenmark. In Hirscher's best season, 2018, he won 65% of the races he started. His only problem is that Stenmark did that too in 1979. But in 1980, he won 69% of the World Cup races he started, so another edge to Stenmark. We like podiums as well, so let's look at that. Both Stenmark and Hirscher podiumed in 31% of all races during their time on the World Cup, and in 57% of the races they started. So here we have a tie. Now Hirscher won 8 overall cups, but what was his average position in the overall cup standings for his career? Surely he's gotta have the edge here. Surprisingly, it was 8th, mainly due to some weak showings early in his career. Now Stenmark comes out at 5th, regardless of whether we take the 3 overall cups or the more fair 6 overall cups. So even here there's an edge for Stenmark. Now with all of that, I think it's pretty clear that in most ways Stenmark's World Cup career was actually better than Hirscher's. It's unsurprising that Stenmark could edge out Hirscher in the counting stats like total World Cup points scored. That was Stenmark's longevity. What surprised me was that Stenmark's actually ahead also in percentage stats and averages, like win percentage or even World Cup points scored per start. That was Stenmark's consistency. In fact, for World Cup stats, Hirscher is only ahead of Stenmark in 2 categories: overall cups and number of points scored per season. But for that second stat, we need to remember that Hirscher had 3 more starts per season. But how could it be then that Stenmark, with better percentages, only managed 3, or more fairly 6 overall cups when Hirscher took 8? Was it the competition? Well, if we have a quick look at the super ranking, we can see that Hirscher, who sits at the top, competed against 2 others in the top 10, Axel Lund Svindal and Bodie Miller. Stenmark, on the other hand, competed against 5 in the top 10, Mark Girardelli, Pirmin Solryggen, Alberto Tomba, Kjetil Åmot and Gustav Töni. Could it be that Stenmark's competition was just a bit better than Hirscher's? It's hard to know, and before you say it, of course, it could just be that Hirscher's competition isn't higher on the ranking because Hirscher always beat his competition. And maybe that's true, but when you make that judgment, remember that Stenmark actually had better percentages and averages than Hirscher did on the World Cup. So, for me, the World Cup comparison lands like this. Hirscher sets off with a significant edge because of the 8 overall cups. But when you look deeper into the numbers, you actually see that Stenmark overtakes Hirscher, in my opinion anyway. Longevity and dominance against potentially better competition should be taken into account. Percentages and averages also play a part in how good a skier was. Personally, I think it's hard to evaluate championships. The stars have to align, and if you have a bad one, or if you're banned like Stenmark was in '84, it's 4 years to the next Winter Games. But we all value them very highly, so we need to have a look at them. And here they are, head to head. Hirscher has a few more World Championship medals, so edge to Hirscher. Hirscher was also a bit unlucky. He finished 4th in a few championship races. Stenmark had 1 4th and 1 5th. Like I said earlier, Stenmark's 2 Olympic golds from 1980 are also considered as World Championship golds. What the hell? That ain't right. But relax. First, let's make one thing clear. The super ranking simply disregards those medals, so in the end, Stenmark is at a disadvantage. Now, how can I say that? Well, as you see from the graphic, Hirscher and Stenmark had the same number of championships available during their careers. Stenmark was banned from the '84 Olympics because of a license issue. So, although Stenmark's career was much longer, he had fewer championships available to compete in, particularly during his peak from '75 to '84. Let's zoom in on Stenmark's decade of dominance for a minute. He had 5 championships to go to in that decade, but because of the license issue he was banned in '84, so he only competed in 4 championships, 2 Olympic Games and 2 World Championships. In Hirscher's best decade, he went to 3 Olympic Games, 2010, 14 and 18, but he also had World Championships in 2011, which he missed because of injury, 2013, 2015, 2017 and 2019. That's 5 World Championships available. Injury is part of the sport, so we can't really disregard the 2011 World Championships. Now, we'll never know what Stenmark might have achieved if he had been able to ski in 3 Olympic Games and 5 World Championships, but as you can see on screen, and as you'll know from episode 1, in the decade we're talking about, 1975 through 84, Stenmark dominated the World Cup with a win percentage of 46 and a podium percentage of 75 in slalom and GS. Now, in that decade, Stenmark did go to 4 championships, the Olympics in 76 and 1980, and the World Championships in 78 and 82. So what did he do there? Well, he won 5 golds in 8 starts and podiumed in 7 of 8 starts. During his peak decade, Stenmark had a win percentage of 63 and a podium percentage of 88 in championship races. Kinda makes you wonder what Stenmark might have done if he, like Hirscher, had been able to go to 3 Olympics and 5 World Championships during his peak decade. But Stenmark didn't ski in all those championships that weren't even held. So what's the point of all of this? Well, it's the super ranking. I'll deal with the points allocation in the super ranking section later on in this video. Here, I want to ask you this question. If the World Championships took place every 4 years before 1985, and from 1985 they've taken place twice as often, is it reasonable that they're worth the same number of points in the super ranking? To me, that seems unbalanced. But now, back to reality. I remember Hirscher as a great slalom and GS skier. His 2014 Olympics were quite disappointing. I bet you he was desperate for a first Olympic gold in 2018. Now, do you remember that his first gold was in the combined? Now, I don't mean to sound petty, but I don't consider the competition as fierce in the combined as in the slalom and GS. And I bet you if Hirscher could have chosen 2 golds before the Olympics, it would have been slalom and GS, not combined and GS. In the end, I'm gonna put it this way. Obviously Hirscher has the edge, but with a big if in Stenmark's column because of Stenmark's banishment from the 84 Olympics and the weight of Olympic medals for society at large, as well as in the super ranking, and the fact that Stenmark only had 2 World Championships to compete in during his peak, while Hirscher had 5. Stenmark was a 2-trick pony. He was the best of all time in slalom and GS. Hirscher was a bit more versatile. He was great in slalom and GS, but Hirscher was also decent in Super G with 1 win and 2 bronze in 22 starts. And he did pretty well in the combined. Like we've just seen, one of his 2 Olympic golds was actually in the combined. But we need to be fair here. Stenmark was a turn specialist, and until he was 27, there were the 2 technical disciplines and the downhill. There were a few combined races, but always with the downhill leg in them. Hirscher grew up with the Super G around, and in Hirscher's career, there were combined events in which the speed leg was a Super G. Like I said, those were the only combined events that Hirscher ever skied on the World Cup. I'm just saying it was easier for Hirscher to be more versatile with the Super G around. After the Stenmark rules came into force, Stenmark did try his hand at downhill to have a chance to win the overall cup. But he didn't do very well. He knocked himself unconscious in the summer of 1979 in a downhill training crash. It's understandable if that knocked the wind out of his speed career. He did start one downhill though, in Kitzbühel of all places, where he finished 34th. The edge is to Hirscher, but there are extenuating circumstances on Stenmark's side here. I think it's reasonable to take into account the impact an athlete had on his or her sport. I grant that this category is less concrete than stats and medals, but it nevertheless plays a part in how history will remember an athlete. Now, when Hirscher came onto the World Cup scene, skiing looked like this. And when he finished, it looked like this. When Stenmark debuted, racers skied around bamboo gates and it looked like this. And like this. When Stenmark retired, the sport was fundamentally changed. It almost looks like a different sport. Spring-loaded gates and crossblocks, helmets, hand and shin guards. The Super G had been introduced. The speed looks to have increased by more than 50%. Now, Stenmark was integral to all these changes. Stenmark was actually so dominant that the rules were changed to make it harder or even impossible for him to win the overall cup. And Hirscher was never treated that way. Edge to Stenmark. Here is the super ranking again. The super ranking is based solely on counting stats. The ranking is great, but as I said before, I don't agree with all numbers that make up the super ranking. Here, I'm gonna address the two biggest issues I have. Number one, I don't agree with the points allocated for World Championships. As I've mentioned before, up until and including 1982, the World Championships were held separately every 4 years, and the Olympics were simultaneously considered as World Championships. The super ranking does not double count Olympic medals as World Championship medals from that era, and I think that's correct. I wouldn't double count them either. But that means that in the eyes of the super ranking, before 1985, the World Championships were held only every 4 years, and from 1985, they've been held every 2 years, and yet the medals have been allocated the same number of points. I don't think that's fair. Personally, I would just give World Championship results half the number of points from 1985, or give them the same value as the Olympics before 1985. That seems to be the most fair. But I'll give the values also for 75% of the Olympics as well as 75% for World Championships from 1985. I don't think the last two options fully balance things out, but I do think a balanced solution lies in there somewhere. And without the adjustment, the super ranking certainly favors skiers from 1985 and later. Number two, I don't agree that silver and bronze championship medals should score points, but that finishing second or third in the overall cup or an event cup should not. To me, finishing second in the overall cup, for example, is a bigger achievement than a silver at a championship, and it should be rewarded with additional points. The simple solution that I would suggest is that finishing first, second and third in the overall cup scores the same as gold, silver and bronze at the Olympics, and finishing first, second and third in a discipline cup scores the same as gold, silver and bronze at the World Championships. Now remember that I have proposed that World Championship results from 1985 should be worth 50% of results from World Championships before 1985. So just to keep things in line, I will simply give all discipline cups that 50% score. So first place would now score 4 points instead of 5 as they do in the super ranking. And second would score 1.5 points and third 0.75. As a result, you will see that their points from cups in the super ranking are a bit different. Those are the changes I would propose to the super ranking in this video. Again, I want to stress that the super ranking only takes counting stats into account. It doesn't adjust for eras other than by giving less weight to results in the combined from earlier eras. It doesn't take percentages or averages into account. It doesn't take any other factors into account, such as, for example, seasons with 10 or more wins. In a deeper analysis, I would always weigh those things as well, particularly if the racers are close in super ranking points. With all of that said, I still very much appreciate the super ranking, and it is a great starting place. So, here are the unadjusted numbers. We see there is a big gap between Stenmark's and Hirscher's score in the super ranking as given by the ski database. But now let's immediately adjust the score so that Stenmark has 6 overall cups, an increase of 45 points. After that, let's add Stenmark's parallel slalom results by adding 4.8 points. Those numbers are closer to the actual truth and only based on those two adjustments, and I think it's hard to object to them after what I went through in the Rules and Asterisks episode. Stenmark gains just under 50 points. Hirscher still holds on to the lead, but it's much smaller now. Now I'm going to show you what would happen if we were to adjust the points allocation in the super ranking as I suggested above. First, let's balance the numbers for the World Championships, because in the eyes of the super ranking, they were held every 4 years for most of Stenmark's career instead of every 2 years as they were during Hirscher's career. My favorite option is to give the World Championship results from 1985 and later 50% of the value they have up until and including 1982. It seems fair. They happen twice as often, so they're worth half the score. A less realistic, but still my second favorite option, would be to view World Championship results up until and including 1982 as valuable as the Olympics, because they happened every 4 years. The other two options adjust the score less, but also don't fully account for the differences from era to era. World Championship results until 1982 would be worth 75% of Olympic results, or World Championship results from 1985 would be worth 75% of results until and including 1982. These two options still favor more recent skiers, so they're not balanced. I think you would only choose them from fear of being too heavy-handed with the super ranking system, but I don't see how that's actually valid reasoning. After those adjustments, Hirscher would hold on to the lead by less than 10 points in two scenarios. Stenmark would take the lead in my two favorite options, but by less than 10 points. To me, that puts them in a virtual tie in the super ranking. So, let's move on to balancing the super ranking so that finishing second and third in the overall cup and discipline cups score additional points. Like I said earlier, for discipline cups I've gone with 4 points for a win, which is 1 point less than in the super ranking system, and 1.5 points for second and 0.75 points for third. Stenmark loses 15 points for his first place finishes in event cups, and Hirscher loses 12 for his, which is why you might not recognize the numbers. Hirscher would go from 180 points for cups in the super ranking to 173. Stenmark would go from 120 or 165 if we give him his 6 overall cups to 152.25 or 185.25 with 6 overall cups. With the 6 overall cups, he would overtake Hirscher in the super ranking with a small lead, but it's pretty much a tie. Like I said, the super ranking is a great resource, but we have every right to come up with our own proposals for a ranking system, particularly if our proposals are more balanced across eras and balances out the World Cup more fairly to championship results. And I don't think I've been very heavy-handed in my attempt at making the super ranking more balanced. Less points for championships that were held twice as often, or vice versa. Points for finishing second and third in cup standing. That is it. Now finally, let's see what happens if we balance the super ranking for both World Championship results and give points for finishing second and third in the cups. As you can see, Stenmark would then take a clear lead in the adjusted super ranking. With both adjustments, it's actually not even close anymore. With a more nuanced look at the achievements that go into the super ranking, I favor Stenmark. Maybe you disagree, and that's fine. But why would you disagree? Do you disagree that Stenmark had fewer championships that count in the super ranking? Do you disagree with my suggestion that being the second best slalom skier over the course of a whole season should also be worthy of points in the super ranking when being the second best slalom skier in one race at the World Championships is worth points? At any event, to me, anything less than a tie in the super ranking seems unfair to Stenmark. These two skiers achieved so much, it's really not necessary to get involved in any hypotheticals, but there is one unknown in each of their respective careers. For Stenmark, it's obviously the 1984 Olympics. As I said in the Rules and Asterisks episode, I think Stenmark would have come home with 2 medals. Granted, that is pure speculation. For Hirscher, it's obviously what he could have done if he hadn't retired in 2019. Seems to me it's pretty clear that Hirscher could have won a lot, and I find it impossible to speculate with any numbers. For example, would you add 1, 2, or 3 seasons? Would you add championship medals? And Hirscher chose to retire when he did, and I'm gonna assume he had very good reasons for doing it then. It also seems like Hirscher was considering a comeback while I've been recording this video, but it seems like he's decided against that now. In the end, I think the situations are quite different. Stenmark definitely wanted to race in the Olympics, and Hirscher did not want to carry on. So, after all of that, where do we actually end up? Well, if we just go by the numbers in the super ranking, we go with Hirscher, and it's not even close. However, if we look at the underlying numbers and circumstances, the picture becomes more nuanced. Stenmark should have won 6 overall cups, and we should count his parallel slalom results. If we do that, they are much closer in the score on the super ranking. I think some sort of balancing out must be made to the super ranking because of the difference in how often World Championships were held. Otherwise, we aren't really even comparing apples and oranges. It becomes more like comparing TVs and wine or something. And if we make it more balanced, they are virtually tied in the super ranking. To me, the super ranking would also be more balanced if finishing second and third in the overall and event cups scored points. That kind of adjustment would put Stenmark in front even without adjusting the World Championship points for eras. But again, to me, the super ranking is just one component in the comparison. In a well-rounded comparison, I think it's fair to look beyond counting stats, meaning the super ranking. In my opinion, we should factor in Stenmark's edge in averages and percentages, which is extra impressive considering his longer career. I would also want to factor in some other achievements, like his 4 seasons with 10 or more wins, compared to Hirscher's 1. The fact that the rules were changed to keep Stenmark in check is an achievement in and of itself. At least Stenmark thinks so now.
Min största seger är egentligen att de var tvungna att ändra reglerna på grund av mig.
Hirscher never received such special treatment. I think it's pretty clear that the sport changed substantially during Stenmark's career. In no small part, those changes were brought about by Stenmark. Hirscher certainly progressed the sport, but the changes were more incremental rather than fundamental. We have the two what-ifs, Stenmark's banishment from the 1984 Olympics and Hirscher's fairly early retirement. I'll leave it to you to decide what might have happened on another branch of the wave function of the universe. For me, I have ended up at this conclusion. A more balanced version of the super ranking puts Stenmark ahead. With just one of my 2 proposed improvements to the super ranking, Stenmark either ties or overtakes Hirscher. Even without the improvements, but with Stenmark being granted 6 overall cups, the super ranking score is so close that we should factor in other aspects. Those aspects mainly favor Stenmark. So, for me, the GOAT is Stenmark. If you can't live with that, you could settle for a tie, co-GOATs, Stenmark and Hirscher. If you still pick Hirscher, I totally understand. I can't think of a sport that has 2 better options than Hirscher and Stenmark as potential GOATs. In the end, it's your choice. I just wanted to figure out who I would pick. Now, if you fancy, we could also factor in what we could call left field categories. Stenmark edges out a narrow victory in the post-stamp category, with countries like Paraguay and Upper Volta, now Burkina Faso, having made post-stamps of Stenmark. And that Stenmark looked like this when he was 55. And that he won the Swedish version of Let's Dance in 2015. And that he could jump like this at the age of 60. What a guy. Thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe. Shout out to Matteo Pacor at the Alpine Ski Database for his hard work in keeping track of and making available all the stats from the World Cup, World Championships and the Olympic Games at www.ski-db.com. Incredible work. Thank you very much.